Hello everyone, this is Colin Dunkel, and for my project I am doing this presentation on the crisis in Venezuela. As you all know, I'm sure Venezuela has been dominating the news cycle, which makes it particularly appropriate for the class Contemporary World Issues that we are taking. The crisis in Venezuela has now led to two presidents and a lot of conflict in the country that seems like it could precipitate and become an international conflict at any moment. To give a little bit of background, Venezuela's economy is very heavily dependent upon oil and natural resources, profiting on the sales of oil. And for a long time, the Venezuelan economy was thriving because of this. There was a boom in oil sales and prices were high, and so the Venezuelan government had plenty of money under former President Hugo Chavez. Chavez would undergo these massive social programs that would provide aid to the Venezuelan citizens, but when the oil prices dropped, the demand for these programs remained the same. However, there's no longer the same amount of money flowing in from oil profits. On top of this, Chavez and many of the top government officials were leading lavish lifestyles and often filling their pockets with public money. There was a lot of corruption on a grand scale, which also gets exposed and leads to a lot more discontent with the government as the economic crisis worsens. To counteract the low oil prices, the government really had no appropriate policy, and instead they were mismanaging the crisis and printing off more money, which of course leads to inflation. And the inflation increases during Chavez's presidency, but it really starts to take off under the presidency of his successor, Nicolas Maduro. By 2016, the inflation rate in Venezuela had reached 800% and showed no signs of stabilizing. The projected inflation rate for 2019 is over 1 million%, according to the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. In the picture on the right, you can see 65 million bolivars, which is what it costs to now buy one roll of toilet paper in Venezuela, which just goes to show you the absolutely ludicrous levels that the inflation has reached. In 2018, also according to the IMF, the unemployment rate at Venezuela was at 35%, and it is expected to rise to 44% in 2019. And this is higher than the unemployment rate in Venezuela has ever been. A 2017 United Nations report found that 94% of Venezuelans live below the poverty line, and that 25% of them require immediate humanitarian aid. As you can see in the picture on the bottom right, even when people do have the ridiculous amounts of money that it takes to buy a good, there is nothing for them to buy. Stores are often being ransacked, and stores often can't even get the supplies that they need to sell in. The International Monetary Fund also found that from 2017 to 2018, Venezuela suffered a 25% drop in GDP, which is essentially losing a quarter of your functioning economy, and this is higher than what the US suffered during the Great Depression. And a more recent development on this story is that in the past couple of months, there have been severe rolling electricity blackouts, and there's no electricity in large parts of the country. And this is especially becoming a problem as we reach towards the summertime months, being in a tropical climate. This could really inflict further hardship upon the people of Venezuela, who are already living in severely impoverished conditions. In February of 2018, President Maduro called a constitutional crisis, which allowed him to create presidential elections 4 months earlier than scheduled. In doing so, this allowed Maduro to disqualify and outlaw a lot of the major opposition parties that were growing in discontent as the economic crisis in Venezuela continued. Obviously, this drew a lot of attention from both internal members and international political figures, and This move by Maduro is really seen as him trying to consolidate a dictatorship and weed out political opposition. These protests that surrounded the constitutional crisis, as Maduro called it, led to over 3 million participants, which is over 10% of the country's population, becoming involved in this protest. However, despite of these increasing internal and international pressures, Maduro was sworn in for his second term early January of 2019. Immediately following the inauguration of Maduro, the president of the National Assembly, Juan Guaido, announced his plans to remove Maduro from office through the constitutional mechanisms that the Venezuelan constitution provides for. Guaido and the National Assembly created a provisional government, and this provisional government selected Guaido as the new president. In his inauguration address on January 23rd, Guaido called for members of the National Army to revoke loyalty to Maduro and join him in representing the people of Venezuela. Maduro, of course, responded to this by declaring that Guaido was placed by the United States to create a coup and allow the U.S. to have another puppet state in South America, similar to what they did in the 70s and 80s when the CIA was replacing the head of states in a lot of South American, Latin American countries. So what does this mean for Venezuela? Now there is a civil conflict between the incumbent government led by Maduro, who has a lot of military support as well as support from international countries such as Russia and Cuba. And then on the other side, you have the Guaido presidency, which is backed by the Supreme Tribunal of Justice of Venezuela, which swore him in, and a lot of popular movement. A lot of the common people support Guaido, as does the United States and many of the UN member states. In response to this crisis in Venezuela, the USNS Comfort, a hospital boat with the purpose of humanitarian aid, was deployed in October of 2018 on an 11-week mission to assist with the rescue of immigrants fleeing from Venezuela. This economic crisis and all this social turmoil has led to massive amounts of immigrants fleeing from Venezuela, putting disproportionate strain on countries neighboring Venezuela, such as Peru and Colombia, and this U.S. mission was to assist in the relief of some of these immigrants. Maduro officially broke ties with the United States in 2019, as he said that Guaido was a U.S. pawn. However, he quickly re-engaged in tentative talks with the U.S., as the U.S. is a strong economic powerhouse and the Venezuelan economy is still severely in recession, and so they need every economic ally they can get. In spite of these really tentative talks that the U.S. and Venezuela has been engaging in since the new year, the U.S. still strongly backs Guaido and holds ties to the Guaido government. Also in January, around the same time as Maduro and Guaido were both sworn in, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton warned that attacks against U.S. diplomats or Guaido would be met with significant response. As I already mentioned, Cuba and Russia have taken interest in supporting Maduro and the Maduro government, and the discovery of Cuban and Russian military resources in Venezuela has led to escalating talks of small-scale military operations as recently as this week from the U.S. government. This is the current state of the situation in Venezuela. There is no clear end in sight, and the international pressures are rising. And so it will be interesting to see how this issue develops over the next couple of years, and especially under the remaining term of the Trump administration. That concludes my presentation, and I hope that you enjoyed it and got to learn something about the crisis in Venezuela and now have a better understanding on this important issue that is dominating international politics. Thank you.